This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This is the last Top 10 of 2019, and that means it's time for me to share my favorite cards of the year, like I did in both 2017 and 2018. This list is, obviously enough, very subjective and is just based on the cards that I've had the most fun playing with in 2019. 2019 will always be remembered as a year that had lots of bans and restrictions and lots of problem cards were printed, but there are also some pretty fun cards printed this year, and that's what we'll be looking at in this video. Cards that make this list don't have anything to do with how good or bad a card is, again, just based on how much fun I had playing with the card. For a card to be on this list, it had to have been printed in 2019, and reprints don't count. So the sets that came out this year were Core Set 2020, Ravnica Allegiance, War of the Spark, Throne of Eldraine, and Modern Horizons. Keep in mind that 99% of the Magic I play these days is limited, so most of what I have to say about how fun these cards are relates to that format. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, I have Gilded Goose from Throne of Eldraine. This is a card that makes the list less because I had a lot of fun playing with it. Unfortunately, I think I only ever drafted it once and I never drew it. But a list of my favorite cards for a given year would be pretty incomplete without a bird, especially because this one is a waterfowl, something we don't see a whole lot of in Magic. If you don't know, in my non-Magic life, my fiance and I volunteer to help take care of waterfowl at a local pond, and we also regularly capture injured or sick ones and take them to rehabilitation centers. We love all birds and all wildlife really, but we really love ducks and geese, so I was super pumped when this card got spoiled because we don't see a whole lot of waterfowl in this game, and it has some pretty amazing art. It's extra icing on the cake that it has turned out to be a great card for Standard, so I get to see it even more than I might have otherwise. At number 9, it is Icefinca Wattle from Modern Horizons. It reminds me of Baleful Strix, and that's a great place to be. Modern Horizons has had its fair share of problems and has almost certainly impacted Modern even more than the designers of the set intended. I mean, Hogak had to be banned. But the limited format for Modern Horizons was amazing, and my favorite archetype was the blue-green snow deck. I've always had an affinity for snow and Magic, and seeing it as a full-blown, well-supported archetype in Limited was awesome. The Coatl really embodies how I most enjoy playing Magic too. I love the combination of Death Touch, Flash, and drawing a card, because it means you can kill just about anything and get a 2-for-1 out of the deal. 2-for-1s are super satisfying and Limited, and we're going to see more cards that are good at creating those as we move up this list. At number 8, I have Tomebound Lich from Core Set 2020. The archetypes I tend to enjoy the most in Limited are the grindy ones, and Tomebound Lich was the signpost in common for blue-black, which was certainly a deck that liked to play the long game. Looting is always a nice effect in Limited, helping you improve the quality of cards in your hand, and the Lich can do it multiple times. He always does it when he comes down, and he'll do it when he hits your opponent too. And your opponent ends up having to take that hit in a lot of situations, since the Lich also has Death Touch, meaning they have to make a decision about whether losing a creature is worth it. On top of that, the Lich also has Lifelink, which is some great additional value. Even if you can't attack with it, it loots for you and blocks well since it is capable of trading with anything, and it's also gaining you life. I usually felt like it was going to be a pretty good draft if I could pick up a couple of this Lich in the format. At number 7, I have Living Twister from War of the Spark. I have always loved cards like Seismic Assault, so the idea of a creature that is a Seismic Assault with legs was very appealing to me. I love cards that are powerful flood insurance and Limited, and that is exactly what you have here. Being able to turn all of your late land draws that you don't really want into shock is a very powerful thing. I also love that it has the added ability to return lands to your hand, so you can turn the lands on your battlefield into shocks too if you need to. If it is the late game when you play this, you're probably going to untap and just win the game, or get very close. It even has a pretty impressive body for the cost as a 2/5. The one tricky thing about the Twister was its mana cost, but luckily the format had pretty decent mana, and anytime I saw one of these in the early going, I took it, and he certainly factored into every single game where I got to cast him. At number 6, I have Deathless Knight from Throne of Eldraine. It is sort of a stand-in for all the food payoffs in the set. Black-green has been by far my favorite color pair in the format, because it is just so good at grinding out long games, which are my favorite kind, and it also has so many ways to get amazing value. Deathless Knight is a great example of this, and having one or two of these has won me a lot of games in Limited. A 4-2 with haste that just won't stop coming back to the table and attacking is a pretty scary thing, especially if you can consistently bring him back with your food, and any good food deck can do that. Your opponent might have a measly 2-2 to block it a time or two, but pretty quickly, they have to start trading better cards for it, and you end up way ahead of your opponent in terms of card advantage. Either that, or they just start taking 4 to the face every turn. The nastiest thing I ever did was once having 3 of them in my graveyard and getting them all back. Like I said, this is a stand-in for the other fun food payoffs, like Trail of Crumbs or Savvy Hunter. Deathless Knight, though, was definitely the card in the deck I had the most fun with. At number 5, I have Dread Presence from Core Set 2020. This guy was a ton of fun. Dread Presence gave you some pretty ridiculous value if you could manage to put a swamp into play, and while it didn't have the most impressive stats, as long as you waited to play it until you could also play a swamp in the same turn, you're going to be getting one of those 2-for-1s that I love so much, and that's at the worst. If you really got things going with the Presence, it was unbeatable. One of the decks I had the most fun with in the entire format was one where it worked out for me to go mono black, and Dread Presence was of course absolutely absurd in that scenario. It was kind of like a nice little preview of Throne of Eldraine, where you can end up in monocolored decks on a more regular basis. I think it would be a lot of fun if we see a cycle of cards like Dread Presence, with each color receiving their own version of it. At number 4, I have Watcher for Tomorrow from Modern Horizons. While I think Snow is my favorite archetype overall in the format, Watcher for Tomorrow is my favorite card in Limited. Modern Horizons was a great Limited format in general, but I also loved all of the cards that were in the set with rarely used mechanics, or cards that referenced older aspects of Magic. Watcher for Tomorrow comes with the Hideaway mechanic, and it makes it so that when he leaves the battlefield you get a card. And it is usually a pretty good card, because you get to select it from a few different choices. This means that the Watcher was a nice way to get a 2-for-1. But where he really got nasty was in a deck that had some ninjas. Note the Watcher doesn't have to die to get the card under it, and that means that when you use Ninjutsu and return the Watcher, you get the Hideaway card. Additionally, the blue-white mechanic was about blinking creatures, and that allowed you to abuse the Watcher too. That was something I really loved doing in this format, and is just one example of some of the cool designs and interactions available in what was a really awesome set. At number 3, I have Divans Acuity from Ravnica Allegiance. This card was super wacky, and not one that I ever predicted would be as good and limited as it was. It has a pretty unique effect, essentially paying you off for pretending your instants are actually sorceries, something that the addendum mechanic in Ravnica Allegiance also paid you off for. But the fact that you just get to keep playing the Acuity, gaining life, and drawing cards makes it so that you can actually stabilize, even against some faster decks. If someone gets an Acuity in play and is able to recast it 2 or 3 times, they're just going to win. It was a lot of fun to really draw out games and eventually win because of absurd card advantage. Any format where you have time to cast and recast, Divans Acuity is an awesome one. At number 2, it's Frilled Mystic. This is one that makes the list both because I had a lot of fun playing it in Limited and because of nostalgia. One of my favorite cards in the history of the whole game is Mystic Snake, a card I used to play any chance I could back when Extended existed. I just loved that it was a card that added to the board while also countering a spell. It seemed like a great deal. Well, Frilled Mystic is definitely an homage to Mystic Snake. It is a little harder to cast, but also has an additional power. Creatures who counter spells, like the 2 Mystics, are basically always going to give you a 2-for-1 too, and I think I've already mentioned how much I love those. And at number 1, it's Risen Reef from Core Set 2020. This was a polarizing card for sure, with some people thinking it was horrible for the format because it was so darn good, and well, I think they sort of have a point. Risen Reef ended up having much more of a game-warping impact than most uncommons should. In a worst-case scenario, the Reef was going to be a 3-mana 1/1 that draws you a card or puts a land into play from the top of your library. Either way, it gives you a card. That worst case comes with a 1/1 body, which is not all that impressive. However, the problem is that decks playing the Reef also had a ton of elementals and would quickly start chaining together a bunch of them until their board was overwhelming. This meant that suddenly this 3-mana 1/1 was a must-kill, so people had to burn legit removal spells on it to keep that from happening, and even when you do that, you're still getting 2-for-1. And if you couldn't kill it, it was just going to take over the game. That said, I had a ton of fun playing with Risen Reef, and while it probably should have been a rare or something so we saw it a little less regularly, it's hard for me not to enjoy a value engine like Risen Reef. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. What were your favorite cards of 2019? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. And if you make sure you want to catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.